Hey guys, so what's been happening in the hobby this week? Well, I thought we'd have a little discussion on the value of diversifying your techniques, the faster techniques, the slower techniques, and incorporating both into your workflow when you're tackling a project, whether it's an individual model or an army. I've got a few ideas on this, and they're concepts that I've been developing over the time as this channel's been going on. You've been seeing a few of those ideas come forward, and I thought to continue on with that conversation, things like limited palettes and so on. I'll leave some of the links to those discussions as well in the links down below. And if I'm really good, I'll put the limited palette one up in the top right hand corner now, because that sort of goes along with this idea. But really incorporating some different methods, or at least being more active in your approach in choosing methods that are going to help you to stay motivated and basically finish a project, right? So you don't leave things unpainted. I mean, that's the ultimate goal, to get things done, right? So get them all painted. So while we do that, I'm going to be demonstrating some of those ideas with my Stormcast custom scheme here on this model here with his little doggo pal, and I'll do some sped up footage of that, so you get to watch that as we chat about this, and then at the end we'll have a look at him and see how he's gone. So yeah, I hope you enjoy it. Let's get into it, eh? So what are we talking about when we're looking at the value of diversity with techniques when you're approaching a project? What's really the pros and cons of this, and why would you even bother to think about it? Isn't all of it just vary techniques and so on? But what I'm really trying to get at is a more conscious or intention behind the type of techniques you're going to use to paint across something that's more than a project, that's more than just one model, or although that also helps in a single figure too. But this applies quite a bit to when you're doing whole armies. One of the pitfalls that you run into when you're trying to complete an army is you usually go, okay, I'm going to do this as a speed painting army where everything is fast, all the techniques are quick, or you revert to the opposite where everything is labored and long and you take forever and so on. There's never really a stage where you really go, I'm going to choose a combination of fast and slow techniques. It's usually just happens out of luck half the time. But what I'm sort of arguing for is more of a conscious choice to incorporate both efficient and faster techniques whilst also leaving space for slower, more labored techniques within the one project. And so you don't end up with something that takes quite as fast as a speed painting army, but on the same side of the coin, you're also not allowing it to take too long. So you're trying to strike a balance, and you could argue that that's what you're always trying to do, but often I find that that's not actually what you end up doing. You either do one or the other often. You get caught up in technique and just taking ages, or you try to rush through it. And the problem I find with speed painting has a lot of benefits to it, and there are a lot of pros to that, but I feel that often, and I've said this before on the channel, that when I've done it in the past, that army is generally not the one that I end up playing with or using very often. So that's kind of the con of speed painting armies. The value and the lessons you learn about workflow and the work ethic behind finishing something, that's all super valuable, right? That feeling of accomplishment is very important. And so that's really the value of speed techniques, is attacking a problem, finding a solution that's fast and effective, that gives you a decent result, and that feeling of completion at the end without having it to take a huge amount of time to get there. So that's like your quick endorphin hit, and that is very, very vital, and you want that in a project. But having all of it done that way, you'll find that it's a bit like having candy or something sugary. You get that big rush, but then it quickly falls off, and you lose interest in that very quickly. And so I feel that the best of both worlds is what you're really looking for, striking a balance. And so One of the if we move on to now the slower techniques, what are the sort of, I guess, the initial pros or cons of that? Well, you have, obviously you're going to end up with a much better result. So the finished product, if you actually complete it, is going to be of a much higher standard, and so you're going to be more proud of what you've done, even if you don't consider yourself a big painter or any of those sorts of things. If you put your heart and soul into something, if you put your time into something, you'll often have a much more endearing relationship with that thing than if you just rush through it quickly, because you haven't spent that time. Another aspect of the value of this type of more labored approach is getting into the zone. This is an important aspect of any kind of skill that you're trying to develop. You need to spend the appropriate amount of time with that thing that you're doing to achieve a good result. And getting into that zone is really important, because you sort of lose track of time. It's the best part of painting, really. So, you don't want to lose that. That's a really great moment. You're going to just, it's where your technique, your efforts just combine into one sort of euphoric moment, and you get to just live that moment in a, I don't know, it's hard to describe. I use this comparison, but it's like catching the perfect wave for a surfer. There's nothing quite like it, and that happens in pretty much any kind of skill that you're going to learn. You get to this moment of calm, and it's a really important thing to get to. And so, not having that in the project and always just doing these fast, methodical techniques, which, yes, you can get into the zone with that too, but it's a very different type of zone. And so, I feel like that's where you want to have this type of thing. So incorporating some of those slower techniques is going to give you that value for what you're doing. And so really, when you're looking at those two basic, I guess, pros of fast and slow techniques, you're looking at a pretty good combination. So what's also like one of the cons, of slow techniques? Well, it's hard to finish, right? And you often fall short. You often don't finish, or then you rush at the end because you're getting tired of it. So that's one of the real cons of slower techniques, is that you never finish anything, and so you never get that sense of accomplishment. And that's a real problem when you try to complexify a miniature scheme or an army or so on. You end up with a bunch of unfinished projects. So there's also a loss of return, I guess, for want of a better term, on putting into that energy into that kind of approach over the long term, because you can lose out. And so that's where the fast technique really comes in to help give you that little bit of I guess oomph in finishing. And so if you can combine those two things, I think you end up with the best possible outcome. And that requires, like I've said before in many of these little talks now, is conscious intention towards that end. If you leave it up to just happenstance and luck, you'll never really quite achieve this. And you'll find that even if you don't consider yourself a big painter or you just love gaming, that is actually going to help you get models onto the table, because you're going to be happier with the overall effort. And I'm not saying that you need to incorporate 100 stage layer shading and highlighting and so on alongside spray it, metal, dry brush it, ink wash it, done techniques, and put those two together. Obviously there's a scale, right? You can't just incorporate the most high-end Golden Demon winning stuff with the most fast and efficient process where you're dunking it into some streak and grime and whatever and getting a sponge. You've got to come up with a balance of techniques which are kind of copacetic with one another. They're not too disparate away on the opposite ends of the spectrum. This is also important. So it also needs to keep in mind your own skill level. Okay, so that's something personal. You'll have to decide on what that is, but you yourself will know what you probably can achieve and what you probably can't. And so picking the right set of skills, and always having at least one little thing in there, or one element of your painting that does push you in an area. So don't have it all super easy. You definitely want to have at least one element of your painting that is going to challenge you a little bit, because that's important for your brain. You may not realize that, but we really love a challenge. In pretty much every aspect of life. If things get too easy, it becomes too simple. We lose interest very, very quickly. That's a thing. If you don't realize that, just try playing a game that's really easy or on an easy mode for a while, and you'll find that you'll lose interest really, really, really fast. So that's the other element of it. You need a challenge. So combining these together in a way that suits your skill level, but also gives you a small amount of challenge. So that's going to be different for each person. So I can't really give you the advice on which ones you should pick. But you want something on the model that is fast. And generally speaking, my advice is to pick the thing that is the broadest area of the model, and that should probably be the fast thing. So if it's something that's encased in armor, then try to pick methods that are going to get that armor done relatively quickly, but might incorporate some higher level color theory into it. Like for instance, what you see me doing with my Stormcast here, I'm using color glazing into the metallics, which is done with a very relatively fast technique, but I'm adding a little bit of higher level theory into this to bump up the overall quality of that fast technique. So I'm combining something that is generally a slower sort of method, but combining with a fast method to give you a better result. So that's one area that you can do it. You can add a little bit of something that's more high end into an approach that's more speedy, right? So that's one area you can do it. And then combining those type of elements, and that's usually where the fast technique is going to come in. And then the slower areas are generally going to be residing around things like the focal point. So in most cases, it's going to be the face, which means painting flesh. Okay, if your models are in reverse, let's say you're doing flesh eater courts or an army like that, or miniatures that are just basically all bare skinned, then that might require, like I'm doing here with the glazing, a combination of maybe airbrushing to get the speed, but then slowing down with some glazing or something like that, color glazing, to get variety on the surface, or you could even glaze with the airbrush. So maybe choosing an airbrush for that skin to help speed it up, right? But still getting a higher result at the end so that it doesn't look like you've just slapped on the paint. So there's those kinds of methods that you can try if it's in reverse. But even then, if you're going to do that, I would then use the brush and slow down around the focal point, so the face. So you change technique to give a more considered part of that whole journey through that model, to give you a bit more interest and a bit more love and care for that model, where you can slow down, and that should, in the end, make each model you do a lot more enjoyable. I would find it hard to believe anyone to tell me otherwise, that that's not going to be more fun, because you're challenging yourself across the board. You're getting to do nice, fun, fast things. You're getting to slow down and do something a little bit more tricky. It might be that you want to incorporate OSL or non-metallic metal or something on a certain area. I certainly wouldn't. As I said, you don't want the harder or more high-end techniques to encompass the entire model. That's a mistake. Unless you're very accomplished and that's what you do, you're a display painter and that's all you do all day and you love just digging into that, then by all means go ahead. But I'm assuming if you're listening to this, then you might be more in the middle somewhere, where you do like to get things done, and you might be looking towards painting armies or painting multiple models in a slightly more efficient way, or you're interested in a little bit more efficiency and joy and happiness with your painting. Then I would urge you to think about these things and maybe try to incorporate some modulation in the type of techniques that you use, and incorporate some new ideas, and that will help fire up your brain and get it thinking outside the box, get it trying to, if you don't own an airbrush, go get one. They're really not expensive. They're like, if you're in this hobby, then you're already spending thousands. So even getting the cheapest airbrush, which is only like $100 or something like that in pretty much every country, and a compressor, which is, in some places less than 100 or 100, a couple $100, and you've got yourself an airbrush set up. Very easy, and at the very bare minimum, that will help you speed up your process. That's one method you can use, okay? And I would definitely urge you to have one on hand, because it's super fun and enjoyable, and it can open up new worlds for you. You may never use it hardly ever, except for like base coating, but that's okay. that's still getting you into using other tools at your disposal. You want to make sure that you're exploring, because that's part of the fun of this hobby, is delving into all these little avenues and finding the things that work for you and that speak to you. If it turns out you don't like that, well, you've only spent a couple of hundred. We've all got a pile of shame of hundreds of dollars worth of stuff that sit in our closet somewhere that we never paint, and we don't whinge about that, right? But so you shouldn't worry about buying tools that you barely use. As long as you're not going overboard, that shouldn't be a problem. And so there we go, just a few ideas on diversifying your techniques on a project, and some pros and cons, and hopefully some useful tips there. So I've finished my Lord Imperatant here, I think that's his name, and yeah, super fun, just mixing up those techniques. You can see how I've used some slow, more involved areas like the skin and the this sort of animal I guess shawl that he's got on, and then speeding up in other areas like the armor, and keeping it a limited palette. Again, another one of the talks that I've discussed, keeping things limited, keeping things efficient, and there you can really slow down and do some nice work, and then speed up when you want to, so it doesn't take forever to finish what you're trying to get done, whether it's a single model or an army. So it's just one of those things to bear in mind, and I hope these little I guess possible ways of thinking about it might help you in the future for your projects. But otherwise, yeah, I'll leave an overview with a closer shot of this guy so you can see more the true colors of what he looks like. But otherwise, that's it, I guess. So I hope this has helped. Please hit that like button, subscribe button, it really helps me out, and I'll catch you on the next one.